we go. All right. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming from various places, both Luzerne County, Lackawanna County, we have New Jersey, Colorado, Virginia, whole nine yards. I don't know if the lady on Facebook from San Diego made it or not. I don't think she quite made it, but we were able to do that. We were talking with her earlier. So, of course, this is Anthracite Mining Heritage Month 2021. Luzerne County Historical Society is pleased and honored once again to be able to participate. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Riccetti Jr. I'm the Director of Operations and Programs here for the Luzerne County Historical Society. As I said, we are recording this lecture both for our YouTube channel and for our digital collection, and as well for PCN, for the Pennsylvania Cable Network. They're going to take this footage and edit it around and run it a few times on PCN. So if any of your friends missed this, it's going to be online, it's going to be on YouTube, and it's going to be on PCN. Tell them, don't panic, don't worry, they'll be able to watch it. Likewise, this is made possible through a number of grants that we received in order to make our content more accessible. We're still in a pandemic. Doesn't look like it's going to let up anytime soon for the next couple months. Everything's going virtually. So we've received a number of grants from the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, from the National Endowment from the Humanities, and as well as through Luzerne County and the CARES Act, in order to be able to digitize our collections and do a lot more virtual programming so that our membership and the general public will be able to access our collection even if they can't physically come in. So we do have that as well. Quick commercial, we're ending January very quickly. Next month, February, is African American History Month. We're going to be adding to our YouTube channel with a wonderful sit-down lecture that I recorded with Constance Wynn, who was a former president of the Wilkes-Barre chapter of the NAACP, talking about the struggle of African American suffragettes. It didn't just end in 1920, it went on for basically another half century after that. So that's going to be wonderful. We're going to have about 9 hours of YouTube content up once she's finished. And then I am doing a blog post on William Gildersleeve and the Wilkes-Barre fugitive slave case, which will go on our blog. And we'll have about 24, give or take, roughly, articles on our blog. So, we have a lot of digital content out there. You found us here tonight, and we're grateful for that. Hopefully you'll find us with the rest of those. So, now, allow me to introduce our speakers this evening. Tonight, you are going to see the future of the museum industry. You're going to see two wonderful young professionals, and then you're going to see me and Bob. I have been very lucky enough to work with both of these young ladies here at the LCHS. They've both interned here, and they actually came back when I asked them to, so that's wonderful. I must be doing something right. First, we're going to have Tristin Milazzo. She's originally from Wilkes-Barre. She graduated from King's College with a degree in both history and English Lit. She went on to get her master's degree in applied history down at Shippensburg University, and she stayed down there. And just recently, this last month, she's the community outreach director. She was just hired for the Cumberland County Historical Society. And we are wonderful to have her start with the first half of our program. And she's going to be followed up by Nicole Kolessar. She's a second-year master's student over at the University of Delaware. So we really are. We're spanning the entire mid-Atlantic here tonight. She's studying both history and museum studies, and she has a BA in history from Wilkes. So we had to keep them separated. We have Kings and Wilkes. They couldn't be in the same room together. It's not a good thing. She enjoys women's history in the 19th and 20th centuries, and that's what a lot of her focus is going to be on for her research. Ellen Webster Palmer, the Breaker Boys, Anthracite, that was sort of the whole genesis of this. Both Tristin and Nicole have done blog posts for us, which you can read. They're archived, they're on there. And tonight, they're going to be lecturing for you guys, and they both have wonderful presentations that I was looking through today. But before we let them loose, we're going to turn it over for a few minutes to the grand poobah of Anthracite Heritage Mining Month, the man who puts this together every year, Bob Wolnesky. Bob, you want to take it away for a few minutes? He's another one from Kings. You have one of your proteges here, tonight.
Yes, yes. Well, I just want to quickly correct you a bit, Mark, because I'm just the coordinator. Guys like you do all the work.
You're too humble.
Yeah, so I'm just, kind of information central. But I want to thank everyone for coming. Some folks had some trouble getting in. I hope that everyone who wants to be in is in. I keep checking my email and my text, and I think we're clear now. So welcome to everybody from all over. This is Anthracite Mining Heritage Month. Each January we do this. It's a much reduced program this year because of COVID, and it's all online this year because of COVID. But we wanted to keep it going because it's a tradition. It's been about 7, 8 years now as History Month. It used to be History Week. It really began in 1999 with an event that happened on this date in 1959, and that was the Knox mine disaster. This is the anniversary of the Knox mine disaster, 62 years. And so you notice my background, that's the Knox whirlpool. When the river broke into the mines up in Port Griffith near Pittston. So it's kind of a momentous day today for anthracite historians and certainly family members who lost people in that disaster. 12 of the there were 12 victims in the Knox mine disaster that fateful day. But that's how this month started. It started around the Knox mine disaster. That's why this month is in January. We started in 1999, as I say, and it's been continuing, and we wanted to keep it going this year. So I'm glad we did it. And I want to thank these participants tonight who are going to inform us and enlighten us, and I'll be sitting right here with you as a student. We have a few more programs left. Tomorrow, we're going to be at the Anthracite Museum in Scranton, the Heritage Museum in Scranton. Bodie Morin is going to talk about After Knox. He's the featured speaker tomorrow. He's also the site administrator for the PHMC. After Knox. Remediation, heritage, and regeneration. We're going to do a tribute to Bill Hasty tomorrow as part of that program up in Scranton, which starts at 2 p.m. on Zoom. Again, all this is on Zoom. You can go to the museum's website for that link. Monday the 25th, Mike Korb from the Anthracite Mining Engineers Institute is going to talk about the Carnegie Medal of heroism in northeastern Pennsylvania, given to dozens of miners, including Amedeo Pancati from the Knox mine disaster. He's the most recent, but there are many, many more going back to early in the 20th century. So that's going to take place 7 p.m. with Mike Korb. And the Lackawanna Historical Society is having a speaker next Wednesday at 2 p.m. And the reason it's 2 p.m. is because Richard Healy, a geographer from the University of Portsmouth in England, is going to be this featured speaker. One of the advantages of Zoom, right? Richard's going to talk about the miners of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad's coal department, the DL&W's coal department, which became the Glen Alden in the 20s. During the Civil War era, Richard has done a tremendous amount of work. He's over here every year from England. For the past 40 years, the University of Scranton published this wonderful book on the railroads and on the coal mines in the 19th century. So that's 2 o'clock on Saturday at the Lackawanna Historical Society. And then finally on the 30th, we're going to do a program that's going to address a tour we're going to take next June and July, late June, early July, COVID permitting. An industrial history tour of Scotland, England, and Wales, June 25th to July 7th. We postponed it from last summer because of COVID. Beth Landmesser, myself, and Bodie Morin of the museum are going to lead the tour leaders. We're going to be in Scotland, England, and Wales looking at railroad museums. We're going to do a canal boat ride. We're going to go to coal mines, cotton mills. We're going to go to a grand home, a British palace owned by a coal baron. So it's not just going to be industrial. We're going to do a lot of other things too. So that's going to be at 2 o'clock on the 30th. If you're interested in joining us, on this 11-day tour to the UK next summer. Please tune in Saturday the 30th. With that, I will turn it back to Mark and thank everyone. And I'm so glad you're here. Look at PCN for the broadcast of several of these events. And we hope to see you around, hopefully in person next year. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Bob. One thing before I turn it over to our speakers, we are going to do a Q&A at the end of this, like a traditional lecture. You can still do that on Zoom. Basically, at the center bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says chat. If you click on that, a little text input will pop up. You can type your questions in there. They will go to me as we are going on with the presentation. You know, if something pops in your head, something you want to ask, you're afraid you're going to forget it, feel free to type it in and send it. It's not going to appear on the screen or whatever. It's just going to go to me and I will curate them at the end, and we're going to do a Q&A and try to get through as many of them as we can. But that's at the end. Right now, we're going to start with the main program, and I'm going to turn it over to Tristin Milazzo. Tristin?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, like Mark said in the beginning, I'm the Community Outreach Director at the Cumberland County Historical Society. So it is pretty nice that I still get to do my mining labor history about 2 hours away. So I'm very excited to be a part of this year. Bear with me for 1 second, because I just have to share my screen with the slides. We're still going to try to run this as much as we can, like an in-person lecture. It's a little bit different on Zoom if any of you haven't done anything on Zoom yet. I know it's new to a lot of people, but my presentation for tonight is called Preservation and Perseverance in the Patches, A Woman's Role in Coal Country. And this is adapted from a blog post that I wrote for the Luzerne County Historical Society a few months ago now. Back in maybe November, I had some extra time with my classes going online, and this was something that popped into my head. I'll take you a little bit through my thought process, how this started, how it came up, because it's not necessarily what I do all the time with mining labor history. So I think we can start with what most people think when we think about mining, and that is probably a breaker. This is the Truesdale breaker from Nanticoke in Luzerne County. And I think this is usually what kind of image is evoked when somebody says mining history, something like that. It's these really massive structures that are part of the landscape and all that goes with it. So mining processes, equipment, safety, that's, I think, some of the first thoughts we think of. Or potentially, which I generally think about also, we may be thinking about some of the people, but more so the miners who are in the mines or the breaker boys and everything that goes along with that. So unions and strikes as well. And in these kind of discussions, I think family comes up, but it's more in the periphery of discussions through something like child labor, which I'm sure Nicole will touch on, or the family economy, but it's still not at the forefront. We're really not thinking really about the people above the mines, outside of the mines. I myself have forgotten that life is continuing every day when people are going down into the mines. And this is something that, you know, I was also guilty of not really thinking about that until I actually went to the Anthracite Heritage Museum in January 2020, which at this point feels like a lifetime ago. But as I was walking through, they had an exhibit, and I'm not sure if it's still up or will be up when they reopen. But it was really an exhibit that looked at artwork from female artists like Lillian Mensky and Olivia Demko. And there was a plaque in there as I was reading it that described women as agents of preservation in coal country, but not necessarily in my interpretation. In this exhibit, they were really talking about how you preserve memory through art. But I was really wondering how else we can think about preservation, because I think there's a couple different ways we can interpret that differently than that. So that's kind of where my mind started. How else were women preserving X, Y, and Z in coal country? And I really started to think that as fathers, husbands, and even sons went down into the coal mines, it was the mothers, wives, and daughters who were preserving daily life above ground. So in this presentation, I'm really going to talk about that the duties that women had inside the home, from daily tasks like cooking and cleaning to managing money and also taking care of boarders, which I'll discuss. But also I will compare that to work outside the home because, as many of you know, if you're especially from an anthracite region, factory work was very important. So that isn't something I want to overlook either. And just as a note too, this presentation really only scratches the surface, especially because I was out of town doing some of this research and also dealing with constraints of COVID. But it's something that I'd like to continue to build on and hopefully create a journal article, because I think this is an area that can use a little bit more like ideas and everything like that. So I'm hoping to continue to work with it. But I do want you to keep in mind throughout this presentation, one of my main points that while women may not have been working outside the home, that does not mean that they were not working and providing meaningful work inside the home. So you'll hear me come back to that point a couple of times as I continue. And the women that I was predominantly interested in were women who were already married and already had families. When you're thinking of work outside the home in mills and factories, you're generally talking about young unmarried women. But I was really more so thinking about mothers and wives who were already settled and things like that. So I was kind of picking through some research that way as well. And a lot of these women were also immigrants, which is important to note because they had potentially limited opportunities outside the home. As I was looking through sources, one from 1908 jumped out from the American Journal of Sociology that said it was really exceptional for a woman who was married to learn English in the early 1900s. And the same source also said that the lives of women in mining camps are apt to be barren of opportunity if left to themselves. So you can see that women were doing something that I think has been generally overlooked. And in a source called What the Coal Commission Found, which was published in 1925, not generally just about Luzerne County, Wilkes-Barre, anything like that. It was a little bit more broad, but it gave the statistic that less than half of 1% of miners who had wives were gainfully employed outside the home. So that's a very small number of women who were working outside the home, but we have to think about the kind of work that they were doing. And this is where I was really starting to get into some research. So some things that were happening throughout the day. Life was really starting for women at 5 a.m. And there was really no set time that it ended. Generally, sources were saying that it ended when everybody else was in bed. Some of the daily duties that women were dealing with were raising children, and along with that, chores that go along with large families, cooking meals, cleaning the house. Of course, I'm sure many of us already know, coal dust was covering the house and furniture. Anthracite coal does burn cleaner than bituminous coal, but that does not mean that there was not coal dust in the house. So cleaning was a very large part of their day. And also something that this picture harkens to is heating water for their husband's bath when he returned home from work. And of course, one other important task of the day was scrubbing a miner's clothes. And I think this image from Lewis Hine really captures it from 1911. And it has a very long title, but a portion of it is at the close of day, waiting for the cage to go up. So you can see just about how miners were walking into the house after a day at work. So really the cleaning of clothes, bodies, and homes was important in coal country and generally left up to the women.
Come on, mute.
And I do just want to take a quick moment and pause just to bring this image up. This is Charles Keck's miner and his family. It's located at the Lackawanna County Courthouse as part of the John Mitchell Memorial. But I do just want to bring this up. I think this is something we can probably analyze in an entire panel. But I think I've even been talking about men and women in kind of these separate spheres. But I do want to just keep in mind that the family was a unit. And I think this really portrays the family, not just as women, not just as men, but they do come together at the end of the day. You can see here a mother, father, and also probably an older son who was either going to work or coming home from work, along with the other children in the house. So that representation is there too, that generally men were in the mines, women were inside the home, but there was a point where the family was coming together as a unit. And I just wanted to put that in there because it's not always separate portrayals. And then another very important part of a woman's day was making additional income, which is where I think work inside the home becomes important because also responsibilities did not just end with the family like some may believe. A source from, again, 1925 called Home Environment and Improvement of Women was really talking about some of these numbers with miners. And it stated that 2/3 of miners were not sole breadwinners. So they needed additional income from the family. And it said a third or more of miners needed help from women, children, or both in order to make a living income. So these seemingly small tasks, making possibly a small amount of money, were very important to the family, especially in times of slow mine work or strikes. So this was making an additional income for the family to survive. And some of these jobs are more general, so raising chickens, growing vegetables, interpreting for other immigrant families in the area, or looking for coal and coal piles to either sell or use to heat their own home. This is a photograph of it, but then just to also contrast it, artists were also making imagery of this. So this is Michael Gallagher's piece called Coal Pickers from 1938. So you can see that there were representations of this in kind of different media. And then one of the also integral parts of earning more income inside the home was borders, which I think is another comment that usually comes up in a lot of sources, but isn't necessarily drawn out as much as I think it could be, and for how interesting it is. And borders in houses were a really good choice for wives or widows of miners, so they can make money, but it's also for those who did not want to work outside the home, so all of this is done within their home. And it said that up to 1 out of 5 mining households took in boarders. So that really gives you an estimate of just how many families were doing this. And just a short description of these boarders too. So many of them were miners who were unmarried or miners who left their family to come to America for work. So boarding kind of became the stepping stone. They would board until they earned enough money to bring their family over and purchase their own house. So they're mostly single men in these homes. And also, most of these houses that they were in were 3 to 4 rooms, and up to 4 rooms were used to take in boarders. And that meant as many as 30 men. It was usually between 20 and 30, which is a lot. But it is also important to note that many of these people were boarding there in shifts. So if you had 20 to 30 men, only 10 to 15 would be there at a point. They would work with shifts. So there would be a shift of men during the day while others were at night shift, and then it would flip. But you'd have this constant stream of boarders coming in and out the house. And that also created additional housework for women, but they were also cooking for the boarders. So boarders would buy their own food and then pay the woman of the house to cook it. So not only was she doing all of those chores for her own family, she was also doing it for up to 30 other people in her home. And then finally, a note on financial management too. This was also a very integral point for women. And John Bodner in Anthracite People said it probably the best of any source that I found, where he said a miner's status and authority at home were usually secondary to his wives. So it was really women who were managing the finances, collected money from their husbands as soon as they get home from work. Bonnie Stefanoff said that some of the women in coal country would stop their husbands at the door before they could even walk in full view of the neighbors to take their paycheck. Sometimes men would have a small allowance if they wanted to go to the bar after work, but generally all of the money went to the women to manage. And so you can see here that this work, it was varied, but also important to the family. It might not be what we traditionally think of as labor or work, but it was very important to how the house was run. But I also don't want to disclude the women who were working outside the home, but I think it warrants a larger explanation here. Work outside the home was more common in anthracite regions than something like bituminous regions, if you're thinking towards Pittsburgh. And that's because bituminous fields had fewer opportunities for women. And that's because there were fewer factories. We all probably know that there is no shortage of factories for women to work in the Wyoming Valley, in Luzerne County, in these anthracite regions. And many women did indeed experience this factory work. In the early 1900s, most factory and mill workers were young, unmarried women. So they were still probably living at home and also contributing to that family economy, but they were working outside the home. But it started to create a cycle. So these women may have been working in the factories, but once they got married, they chose to stay home and began work as we discussed earlier. So taking care of children, cleaning the home, taking in boarders. So it created a cycle that as women got older, they began to stay home. which I think in itself is an important idea. But one that I also want to bring up that I think is an interesting thread that I'd like to continue to follow also is from Bonnie Stefanoff, who I'll reference her book in a few minutes. But she introduced me to this idea of how the face of labor was changing. So generally when I'm doing my research, I look from about 1880, 1890 to 1910, 1912. That's really the time period I look at. And when you're looking at that time period, there is not large numbers of women working in factory, especially older women. And Stefanoff actually attributed this back to child labor laws that are changing. So prior to 1910, especially in that area I'm looking at, child labor was largely unrestricted in both Pennsylvania and across the country, which meant that children were filling jobs in factories. There were not open positions for older women who had to do things at home. But as time started to progress and post 1910, labor laws began to change to protect children. And at the same time, families were also placing more importance on education. So children were also staying in school longer, not necessarily leaving the home and school to work, which is good that education was becoming more prominent. Child labor was more protected, but families were still left with income that they needed. This did at the same time limit how much money they were making every month. So mothers and wives needed to figure out how to fill this gap. And that was to go out into factories, mills, and get these positions that children were now leaving open. But this isn't something that happens overnight as soon as they pass this law. And it's not necessarily something that happens in even a generation either. It's going to take about 30 years. So if you're kind of looking at the trajectory of labor, especially in the anthracite region, it's actually difficult to find a lot about women in mills, older women working in mills or factories. But you do see, as you get into the 1930s and especially the 1940s, there are older married women increasingly working in these positions as they start to get settled. And that whole discussion, in short, is really just showing how labor laws in one aspect of the community can really change the progress of who's getting these jobs. And if that's something you do want to follow, that in itself is a major discussion. And extensive work has been done on women's work in factories, especially towards 1940s and beyond. I do want to mention Bonnie Stefanoff's Their Father's Daughters is a really great source. She starts in about 1880 and goes up to about 1960. So you can see that trajectory develop throughout that book. But also Robert Wolnesky's Sown in Coal Country is another fantastic source to use to see the oral histories of women working in these factories. And that goes from 1945 to 1995. So you can see that there is this area that becomes more popular with this. And that, like I said, is a larger underlying argument of women's work. But you can see here that, again, that I think many of us, and myself included, place more value on, first of all, miners in coal country, and then women, but in the sense of these mill work and things like that. But really there was important work happening in mills, but also very integral work happening inside the home in coal country. And like I said, that in the beginning of this, that life above ground did not stop when men went down into the mines. Sometimes it feels like that when we're looking at the day-to-day of labor, strikes, everything like that. Sometimes it's easy to forget that human aspect of it, and especially the other half of these families. So mothers, women, daughters, everybody is also there and still living life, even when we're potentially looking at a different aspect of this history. And families, no matter what was happening elsewhere, families needed to eat, money had to be managed, and coal dust had to be clean. And it was women, the mothers, wives, and daughters who cooked, managed money, cleaned, and helped support families, whether the coal industry was doing well or if their husbands were on strike. Women were always there in this often overlooked aspect of it. And again, to just reiterate that point, that women may have not always been employed outside the home, but that does not mean that their work was any less important to the family. And just as a final note, and to also connect it to my very alliterative title from the beginning, mothers, wives, and daughters persevered despite the volatility of the coal industry in the Wyoming Valley. But most of the work that they were doing in the private sphere was indeed to preserve the day-to-day life. So with that, I will turn it over to Nicole, and she'll talk a little bit more about children, child labor, and some other figures.
And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can send in your questions for the Q&A with the chat. I know we've got a couple already during Tristin's presentation, so keep them coming in. I am taking note and getting them ready for at the end. So thank you, Tristin. That was wonderful. And I'll drop out again and turn it over to Nicole. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Nicole Kolessar, and as Mark said, I'm a second-year master's student at the University of Delaware, and I have a passion for women's history, and I'm so excited that I get to discuss Ellen Webster Palmer with all of you today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So my presentation today is titled Ellen Webster Palmer and the Breaker Boys. As Tristin discussed very well, may I add, fantastic job, Tristin. Women during this time period used their skills to make an impact on their communities. And Ellen Webster Palmer was also a woman who used her skills and passions as an educator and mother to change the lives of children in her community, but also communities across the nation. Ellen Webster Palmer was born as Ellen Webster in Plattsburgh, New York on October 20th, 1839. Eventually, in September of 1861, she married Henry W. Palmer, who had been admitted to the Luzerne County Bar in August of 1861. Ellen followed her husband to Pennsylvania when he was appointed as the Attorney General of Pennsylvania in 1879. When Henry Palmer's term expired, he and his family moved to Wilkes-Barre to continue his law practice. Palmer had 8 children of her own, was a school teacher, and possessed a passion for childcare and education. It was when she moved to Wilkes-Barre that she learned about the Breaker Boys and was able to propel her passions forward to help others. In a time period in which coal was king, Palmer took care of those who were not seen as significant in the growing industrial nation. The Industrial Revolution propelled the United States into the forefront of international trade and commerce. Factories dominated the skylines of every major city on the East Coast, and a rapidly spreading network of railroads and steamships carried their products to markets at home and abroad. Northeastern Pennsylvania's anthracite coal mines were vital to the economic growth of the nation because it provided the necessary fuel for trains and factories. As production soared, many ambitious entrepreneurs sought to increase their profits by reducing labor costs. Not only did they hire unskilled immigrants, but also children. Children were often even preferred because they were manageable, cheaper, and less likely to strike. Although Pennsylvania made it illegal in 1885 to employ children under 14 inside the mines, younger boys continued to be exploited. The mine operators wanted a growing supply of cheap labor, and parents desperately needed the additional income, even though children received about only 40 cents a day after working about 10 to 12 hours. By 1890, 19% of American children between the ages of 10 and 15 were employed. While several states prohibited child labor, the laws were easily deceived. Additionally, the largest industrial concerns, including coal mining, were exempt from state regulations because they produce coal for a national market. Many immigrant parents, desperate to increase the family income, sent their children to work in demanding and often dangerous jobs. Since coal mining was Pennsylvania's leading industry, children were sent to work as breaker boys, sometimes as young as 7 or 8 years old. Shocked by these deplorable conditions and the poverty of children she saw trudging home from the mines, Palmer became determined to improve their circumstances. When Palmer discovered the terrible conditions and treatment that young boys faced in the anthracite coal mines and the fact that they received little to no education whatsoever, she was determined to change this. On March 9th, 1891, Palmer initiated her work when she met 100 boys, mostly employed as slate pickers in the mines. A second meeting drew an even larger crowd and led to a series of Saturday evening entertainments. According to historian Sally Teller-Loddick, the meetings became so popular, it was, quote, necessary to close the doors promptly at 7:30 to prevent overcrowding. This inspired Palmer to create an organization to aid the boys. This organization was called the Boys Industrial Association, known as the BIA. The BIA provided opportunities for the breaker boys to prepare for a livelihood outside of coal mines under Palmer's leadership and create new interests also out of anthracite coal. It gave those who participated a chance to advance their quality of life. When Palmer created the BIA, these boys were able to live beyond the coal mines and do things that they actually enjoyed. Palmer rented space on the 4th floor of the Wilkes-Barre City Hall with money from public donations. She also secured the services of volunteer teachers who instructed the boys in reading, writing, and arithmetic after they finished working in the mines. Additionally, activities were created that included a singing class, a debating club, a junior literary branch, and even a band, which I thought was really cool. Some of the pictures that I have here are Ellen Webster Palmer with the Breaker Boys, who were also members of the BIA, and also members of the band known as the BIA Drum Corps. While in charge of the BIA, Palmer insisted that each boy take a pledge to tell the truth and observe temperance. In these ways, she hoped to teach mutual respect and unselfishness. By 1899, the BIA had captured the attention of hundreds of more working boys and needed additional space. Once again, Palmer raised the public funds necessary to build a 4-story brick structure in Wilkes-Barre, which included a band room, auditorium, and gymnasium. In this building, Palmer ran the organization from about the beginning of fall until the end of June. Then, concerned with the health of the young children, especially the breaker boys, whose lungs grew black due to coal dust, Palmer took the boys camping and to other local sites in the summer to enjoy the fresh air. They would pitch tents, play games, and enjoy wholesome meals prepared by Palmer herself. Palmer saw the need to change the mental and moral conditions of the young boys who should have been at school and playing games instead of facing harsh working conditions. To initiate change, Palmer put her words into action and fought to give these children a better life. Since there was a lack of preparation in childhood and the absence of boyhood, boys were not able to pick themselves up into adulthood. Therefore, the poverty that these working boys faced in childhood often continued into adulthood. Palmer even stated, quote, "Keep a boy picking slate until 15 years of age and then turn him out to help himself. Where's the lad to find employment with an untrained head and an unskilled hand? Who wants him?" Unquote. She no longer allowed this to occur and planned to enrich and strengthen the lives of those that she referred to as her boys. Due to the hard work of Palmer and others at the BIA, these working boys were educated and learned respect. Under Palmer's influence, they picked themselves up and eventually grew up to become self-reliant men and leading citizens in the Wilkes-Barre area. If not for Palmer, if not for the work of Palmer, the history of Wilkes-Barre would be much different than it is today. Her work contributed greatly to the development of educational skills that working boys were able to use throughout their personal and professional lives. These skills and values have been passed on from one generation to the next and still positively affect the lives of those who live in the Wyoming Valley and beyond. Even though Palmer was an outsider and initially not a prominent person in Wilkes-Barre, the immense amount of unjust labor going on in the area made her take a stand and create a place for herself in the name of compassion and generosity. Palmer's efforts have not only allowed her to have a permanent place in the history of northeastern Pennsylvania, but also throughout the entire country. Palmer's work to educate breaker boys and put an end to child labor inspired a small group of women, which included Palmer, to gather together and create stricter labor laws in 1903. This group inspired many outside reformers to take on this goal and support it on a national level. A year later, the National Child Labor Committee, which was mostly composed of middle-class female reformers, was established and launched a campaign to eliminate child labor and simultaneously provide free, required education for all children. Their efforts were finally successful with the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. This act established a minimum wage, overtime pay, and child labor standards that protected the educational opportunities of minors and prohibited the employment in jobs that have conditions that are detrimental to minors' health or well-being. Unfortunately, Palmer did die in 1918 before any national legislation was officially passed to restrict child labor. Despite this, without Palmer's passion for education and intense work to help children, this act may have never even been created in the first place. When Palmer died at the age of 78, hundreds of her boys came to pay their respects to the woman that lifted them up. In her obituary, it stated, quote, "Mrs. Palmer was prominently identified with religious, educational, and charitable work, but the BIA was nearest to her heart," unquote. Palmer inspired those in Wilkes-Barre and beyond to be kind and protect those who were less fortunate, especially children. She shaped these working boys to realize their potential and rise up from their previous situations as they grew up. Additionally, Palmer defined gender roles that were expected from women in the 19th and early 20th centuries. While she was generous and caring, Palmer was also strong and compassionate about her work. She stood up for what she believed in and refused to stay silent. To commemorate her work, a statue was enacted that features Palmer with two breaker boys who were also members of the BIA. The statue is titled Ellen Webster Palmer, the Friend of the Breaker Boys. The statue was actually damaged over 10 years ago and is no longer standing. And other people maybe want to talk on that. Maybe we could have a discussion. But I truly believe that her legacy is very powerful and continues to live on throughout our lives every day. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nicole. That was wonderful. I'm just going to jump in for a minute because as you were on that last slide, the chat was exploding with people asking, where's the statue now? Where's the statue now?
Oh no,
probably
what have I started?
No, it's okay. It's probably the second most common question I get after, is the Swetland homestead haunted? The answer to where is the statue is it's currently at Bout Studios on the west side. Conrad has it. It's under a tarp. Her face was damaged, the nose area, the eye area. The trouble is the county refuses to pay for her restoration. They believe that the contractors for the River Common project should be the ones to pay. The contractors say the county should pay. It's been tied up. It's this and that. So it's sitting there. It is not getting any worse, but it's not getting any fix. It's not getting fixed anytime soon anyway. It was '07 or '08, I believe, was when it was damaged. It was when they put in the portals and the Millennium Circle and everything on the River Common. And so every 3, 4, 5 years, some young journalist from one of the newspapers does, this hard-hitting investigative piece as to where's the statue. It's the same place it's been. The Historical Society doesn't have it. The Preservation Society doesn't have it. Neither one of the colleges has it. It's at Bout Studios, and until the county decides they want to pay for it, it's going to sit there. But it still exists, and it's still mostly in one piece. It just needs a nose job.
Yeah, I actually, while doing research on the statue, I saw there's a change.org petition to bring back the statue. So if anyone wants to sign it, I'm all for it.
There have been some rather interesting seedy rumors over the past decade and a half as to what happened to her and where she's at. But unfortunately, the truth is much more boring than anything you might read online. Okay, so with that, we will jump into the proper Q&A, and I will stop jumping all over everything. We've got some good questions here, and we're still getting some more now. Of course, just type it into chat at the bottom of the screen. It'll come right to my screen here, and we are going to try to get through as many of these as we can. First question is from Saul, and I guess it's for both of you ladies. Have either of you heard of the superstition that if a woman, anthracite woman, a wife, went into the mines, that it was bad luck for the miners? That's kind of interesting.
I haven't actually heard that.
I'll have to ask my grandmother about that next time.
Have you heard that, Tristin?
No, and that didn't even come up anywhere, but I'm wondering if it would have been something potentially that people would have talked about, but if you didn't, like, if there's an oral history happening, if you didn't kind of go that route, it might not have been recorded anywhere. So I can see, like, through a family that could have come up, but maybe not recorded as easily.
That was common in the Cornish mines. It was very superstitious for a woman to go underground, and the whole crews would leave the mine if a woman went underground.
Wow.
Yeah, it was true in anthracite too, although there were anthracite women who worked underground. I know one woman from Pittston. I know her son, who dressed as a man so she could assist her husband as his laborer. She didn't want to be seen as a woman because of its bad luck. This would have been in the 20s and 30s.
All right, our next question might be more for you, Tristin, since you were talking about the factory workers and things. Did you come across any good sources on the Ann Will Garment Company in your research?
Not yet. I was doing pretty general, kind of sweeping research of this for this. The blog post I wrote was pretty general, and so was this, potentially in the future. Again, I wasn't looking, the factory aspect of this kind of came into development later because I didn't want to overlook that, but I didn't get that specific yet.
If I'm sorry, I gotta say this, sorry, but in my recent book, which was mentioned, Sown in Coal Country, I have an oral history in that book with the owner of the Ann Will Garment Factory from Kingston, William Cherkis. So there's his oral history interview transcribed in that book, just came out last January. So just make that point if someone's really interested in Ann Will.
Well, there we go. We know where we can get a copy of it because you're gonna get the info right straight from the top. That's the best source you're gonna be able to get. Okay, the next question is for Nicole, and this is a good one. Sometimes we go a little too inside baseball here, but the question is, what exactly was the job of the Breaker Boys? What did their daily tasks refer to on a given day?
Yeah, I really read a lot about slate picking, that specific job where they went into the mines and did that work. But can someone speak a little bit, Mark, would you be able to speak a little bit in more detail about the Breaker Boys themselves?
The general most common, stereotypical, archetypical Breaker Boy that you talk about that people generally talk about is what you mentioned. You know, you see the famous photos of them straddling these long chutes.
Yes.
The coal would come in, and as it was going down, they would have to sort through it very quickly and adjust to what is actual usable coal, what is slate, and sort of pick it out. And the name comes from the fact that you were physically in the breaker. The breakers were gravity fed. You know, they would come in at the top, and then the coal would go down this very intricate series of chutes and conveyor belts. Everyone was a little different. That's why if you look at pictures of breakers, everyone's slightly off, slightly different. But that was the general thing behind it. In some, I mean, 99% of the time, that's what you're referring to, or resources are referring to when they talk about breaker boys. And of course, they had, you know, some of the older children and some of the foremen that would walk around, you know, famously, they'd have a riding crop or a switch or something. And if the boys were talking or were, you know, maybe not working fast enough, they'd give them a little shot. And I mean, it was dangerous work because you're up high oftentimes, you're over the chute, the coal is moving very quickly, the pieces are heavy. You're small children, you have very small hands generally, and you know, it's terrible working conditions even for a teenager or for a young adult, much less for some of these children that, as you said, were incredibly young when they started. Sometimes you would see breaker boys referred to when they really mean mule boys, which would, you know, transport the animals in and out, would open and close doors in the mines. But 90% of the time, 95% of the time, they're referring to the actual slate pickers. But that was a good question. I just saw one pop up here about the statue and vandalism. No, it wasn't vandalized. It was damaged when they were redoing the river common. So don't worry about that. Nicole, where was the BIA building located originally?
It was in Wilkes-Barre. I don't know the actual address, but it currently actually is a post office now. My original work on Eldon Webster Palmer was that I wanted to get a state historical marker about her. So I did a lot of research on where this historical marker would go, and I thought it would be perfect to be right next to the old BIA building. And sorry, I could look up the address, and if you want me to like put it in the chat or something, Mark or something, but it's currently a post office, which I think is really, really fascinating.
Well, it's still in employ of the public service anyway, so it's just
exactly right.
Public service. All right, well, I'm just doing a quick scan here to see if I missed anything. I don't think I did. I hope I didn't. Once again, don't forget this will be on YouTube. This is going to be on PCN. So if any of your friends or family missed it, or if you just want to watch it again, you could check that out. I definitely want to thank Tristin and Nicole. These were wonderful presentations. I personally learned a lot. So I'm sure no doubt our audience did too. I was keeping a running tally as we were going on there. I know we broke 40 there for a little while. We had some people drop in, drop out, but I did see a consistent number with a 4 in the beginning there for a little bit, which is just wonderful to see. That's going to make this one of our more successful Zoom programs that we've done. So again, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to Bob Lewinsky and everyone from Anthracite Mining Heritage Month. It's still going on, you know, so keep patronizing that. Bodie Morin is tomorrow, fittingly doing After Knox, being that it's the day after Knox. Of course, you know, today is the anniversary, so we can never forget that. And, you know, so we will go from there. So thank you all again for coming. Have a good evening and stay safe. You know, we're getting through this. There, we could see the dawn coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.